Hello, it's Deborah from the attic down the lane, and today I have the latest card kit from Simon Says Stamp. This one is called Party Like a Panda, and we're going to begin with this 6x8 stamp set that's got loads of pandas and birthday greetings and little sentiments and parcels and balloons. To prime this pen, simply remove the lime green ring around the barrel and the ink will be released. This is a Spectrum Noir Clear Overlay Sparkle pen, and we'll use that later. Then we have our panda die cut, the lollipop, which is for me, I always hide that somewhere. And then there are some papers. So these papers are 6x6 and they are double-sided doodlebug. There are 12 of these sheets and I'm going to have a little flip through just so you can see the types of designs on them and how appropriate they are for birthdays. These sheets are a little bit different. These are Decofoil flock transfer sheets and they have a flock texture on the front of them. You get 4 sheets in each of these packs and they're available in this kit in black and in white, which fits in beautifully with our panda theme. I'll be showing you how to use an adhesive sheet which is included. You can just see that peeking out below. And I'll show you how to use the panda die cut so you can use the flock sheets to create lots of texture for your pandas. This is the adhesive sheet which we'll use in just a moment with the flock transfer sheets. Finally, we come on to 2 envelopes, one in white and one in pink, and our cardstock is black, white, dull pink and peacock teal. That's our kit, and now I'm going to show you how to make a flock panda. I've taken the Stick It double-sided adhesive sheet and I've cut it into 2 strips just slightly wider than the panda die. Now I'm going to adhere the adhesive to the back of the black flock paper. I'm going to take the second strip of the adhesive sheet and I'm going to glue that onto the back of the white flock paper. Then my pieces are all ready to run through the die cutter. So I'm going to use my wafer thin die and I'm going to cut one panda from the black and from the white sheets. I've assembled it onto this piece of black card because I want to show you a little trick using a white gel pen to complete the eyes. I tended to lose the tiny little bits of die cut that should be glued in for the eyes, and so this is my cheat way around it. I'm also going to prepare lots of pandas. I really like these little pandas. I stamped out several using black ink and then I used Simon Says Stamp Clear Fine Detail embossing powder to sprinkle over the top of them before heat setting them. And I did this with several pandas. I did it with some extra little hats and some extra little parcels as well. Any that are left over, I put in the packaging along with the stamps that created them in the first place. I've also pre-prepared some of the sentiments by stamping them and embossing them with white embossing powder. I'm cutting out one of my pandas for my first card. I've already coloured in the cake using some nice creams and yellows because those colours coordinate with one of the pieces of paper from the paper pack that I'm going to use on my teal background. I've got some craft foam which I'm going to cut down and I'm going to glue it to the reverse of my sheet of paper because that will give my card a little dimension. Now all I need to do is glue everything in place and I'll add my panda and finally I'll glue down my sentiment. I'm going to add a little bit of extra lift to my sentiment because I don't want that piece that hangs out to the right over the teal card to get squashed. A little piece of craft foam cut down to size and stuck onto the reverse of my sentiment will solve that problem for me. And I've also added a little bit of foam to the reverse of my panda. All I need to do now is glue everything down into position and let it dry, and then our card is complete. To begin my next card, I'm going to colour up one of my pandas that I had previously stamped and embossed, and I'm going to stamp one of the balloons. This is the heart-shaped balloon. I've used plain black ink and I'm going to add one of the small sentiments in the centre of that. I'm using my Simon Says Stamp embossing powder, the clear one again. I've heat set that and cut the balloon out. I've cut a sash of the bright balloon paper and I've glued it onto a piece of the pink cardstock which I've cut down to size. I'm adding my panda. I'm going to glue that down with the little balloon. The balloon says hooray. I'm going to use one of my blocks just to give that time to glue and hold in position. All I need to do to complete this card is to take a piece of black cardstock and use that as a frame to go around my pink card. For my next card, I'm going to use some dies from My Favourite Things. These are A2 rectangles stacked set 1, and I'm going to cut out a frame. I've used some washi tape to hold down the rectangular dies to make sure that I get a nice even frame. I'm going to use a white top folding card, and I've cut a piece of paper from the paper pack down to size so that this will fit exactly onto my white card base, and I've glued it down into position. This is a piece of ordinary tracing paper, and I'm going to cut this down to size, and then I'm going to glue it onto the reverse of my frame. Of course, you can use Perspex or any clear material that you have, but I like the tracing paper because it allows me to show you this nice and easily without getting glare under the lights. It also gives a nice soft finish to your card. I've used a tape glue runner because sometimes tracing paper is such a thin paper it can buckle. Using a tape runner means that you avoid that risk. I'm going to use it again because I want to glue down some strips of craft foam. I've cut these down so they're nice and thin and they will fit exactly on the inside of my frame. And I'm just going to make sure I haven't got any gaps for anything to fall out of. I've coloured in one of my little pandas. This is the panda that looks a little bit sad. He's got a droopy balloon and a parcel, and he's missed the party. I'm going to glue Sad Panda onto the bottom of my frame. I'm going to use a tape runner again to make sure that it doesn't buckle that thin paper. And I'm also going to add a couple of strips of my craft foam to the back of the panda. This will give him lift as well and mean that his dimension is the same depth as the frame around him. It also means that when I add my little sprinkly things that are going to go into this shaker card, they won't get stuck behind the panda. They won't be able to get underneath the craft foam. I'm using two colours. I'm using Nouveau Festive Gold Circles and Nouveau Olive Green Stars, and these are both from Pure Sheen Confetti range. And I'm using a mixture of these because they match the colours of the papers that I'm using. I can use a wet glue now onto the craft foam because that's going to glue craft foam onto cardstock, so there's no risk that either of those will buckle. I'm going to add my sentiment at the bottom. And finally, I just need a little quality control, shaky shake, make sure the shaker card works, and our card is complete. For card 4, I've already cut down a piece of the brightly coloured paper with the hearts on it, and I've got my little panda. Now, I don't like to measure things, but I do need to find the centre point on this card because I want to add a broad fishtail. So that's why I have my ruler out. You won't see that very often. And I cut that away. I'm going to mount it onto a piece of pink cardstock, which I've cut down from the kit. I've got a banner using red paper, and my panda will sit probably round about there-ish. I'm going to glue the panda down, but I'm not going to glue down the little feet at the moment. I just want to give myself some wiggle room and make sure that everything is exactly where I want it to be. I've mounted the words party time onto a stamp block, and I'm going to try and stamp this onto my red piece of banner paper. You can see I've missed a little bit, but I can get around that by taking a black pen and filling in the gaps where I didn't quite ink it very well. I'm going to glue my little banner across the top of my brightly coloured cardstock, and then I'm going to get my pencil and cut out some craft foam that will sit behind my fishtail piece of paper. That will give everything a little bit of dimension, and that's why I didn't glue the panda's feet down completely. I'm using my block to make sure everything is glued down, and then my card is complete. For card 5, I really like the colour combination of using the paper with the candles on it and the teal paper for the background. I've got one of my round die cuts. This is from Cottage Cuts Dies, and I've run the top 2 sheets of paper through my die cut. I didn't glue them together because I wasn't sure if my die would be strong enough to go through both. So that's why I've made life a little bit more difficult for myself, because I now have to glue the little strip of the candle paper around the aperture that I've cut out. But that's okay, it's turned out really nicely. And I can glue everything down onto my teal background. I've got my little panda that I cut out and coloured earlier, and I've given the panda a jolly little hat in the same colours as some of the colours on the candle paper. And finally, I just need to decide where I want to put my sentiment, above or below the panda, and I opt for below the panda. And our card is finished. Card 6 begins by white heat embossing the words Happy Birthday from the stamp set, and I've added a couple of little hearts in both corners. I'm using the bright candle paper again for my background, and Buster's helping me here. He's advising me on where I should position this little flock panda, which I've cut out and assembled. And once again, I've used my white gel pen to colour in the eyes. I want this to stand out a little bit more from its pink background, and so I've cut a larger circle from white cardstock. I can glue this down, and then I can add some glue onto my pink background and stick everything down directly. There's some overhang, but that's not a problem. I'll turn the card over. I'll just use my scissors to cut away any excess. And with that, our card is complete. Our next card begins with colouring in some parcels. This is the range of colours that I've used. These happen to be Copic pens, but use whatever you have to hand. I've given myself a limited palette and used the same colours on each of the parcels. I've added some craft foam to the reverse of each parcel as well, so that it will stand out. This is a piece of waste paper that I'm putting across the centre, and I'm using the lines on my desk to help me make sure that I try and get this level. This is some yellow Versacolour ink on a dry baby wipe, and I'm adding colour just above the horizon line of my paper, my waste paper. I've got some orange now, which I'm adding to the centre, and as you can see, I'm knocking off the intensity of the colour of the ink before I go in to my card. I don't want it to be too strong. I've got some black ink, and I've got one of the sentiments from the stamp set. This simply reads Happy Birthday. All I need to do now is glue my parcels just into the coloured part of the card. This is a really quick, simple and easy card to make. For card 8, I have a strip of the cupcake paper and I have a panda, and I'm going to show you a couple of ways that you can make the panda look as if he's anchored onto the card. If I leave him like that, he looks as if he's floating. Now my first technique is to use a grey pen. All I want to do is darken that background down a little bit. I could have used a green pen or a pink pen or any of the others, but I went with grey because I thought that would tie in better with the panda colours. All it does is it gives him a place to sit. Now I have one of the sentiments that says hip hip hooray, and I'm going to cut this down. Don't look if you're squeamish. And I'm going to ink up the word that says hooray, and I'm going to stamp that inside the heart-shaped balloon because it's wide enough to take it, and then I can add the hip hip in the top sections. I've got a pink marker pen and I'm going to colour in my balloon before cutting it out. I can begin to assemble my card now, and I have some Nouveau glue which I'm going to add to the reverse of my panda, and I'm going to glue him down on top of his heel, but you will see this change as I decide to add some card at the bottom of that instead. And the reason I changed my mind is because I happen to have the right colour of paper in the paper set. I've cut it out just so it will sit below the panda, and I've glued it under his paws. I've added some of the shimmer pen to the hat to make everything a bit glittery. Card 9 started as a little experiment, but it turned out okay, so I've decided to share it. This is a piece of my transfer paper again, and I've inked up Party Time, and I've added white embossing powder, and I thought I would try and heat set it to see what would happen. Well, it actually took really well, and the paper didn't buckle, and I was quite pleased with that outcome. So then I got a frame that I cut out using my Favourite Things dies, and I've got a piece of paper from the pack which I've cut down to go onto a white top folding card base. My frame I'm going to glue the transfer paper to, and again I was experimenting with wet glue just to see how this would take, and again it didn't do too badly. I've weighted it down with a couple of my stamping blocks to make sure that it glues really well. I've glued the whole thing down onto my background and used my blocks again. I've just set it to one side maybe for 10-15 minutes to let it dry. This is another of my flock panda faces that's been glued onto a background of a circular orange disc, and he's been glued into place at the top of the card, and with that the card is complete. For card 10, I want to show you a way that you can soften a background. If you think a background is too busy or too bright, you can soften it by applying a couple of sheets of tracing paper. But we give ourselves a complication because how do you glue the tracing paper down onto the background without the glue showing through? Well, I'm going to show you how I've done it with this card. I've got that little teal strip at the bottom that's got a sentiment already stamped on it. And then I've got a whole load of other elements with my panda and my balloons, and I'm going to use those to hide the glue behind. We're going to begin with the strip of teal at the bottom, and because my wet glue worked so well on my previous frame card, I'm going to use that again. So I can apply one layer of transfer paper to the back of that and glue that onto the reverse of the teal strip. Then I can add a little more glue and add the second layer. The reason I'm using 2 layers of transfer paper is because I found one wasn't enough to soften the background as much as I wanted. With the bottom of the transfer paper secured behind the teal line with no glue showing, you can add little bits of glue, just a small amount, not too much, to the balloons and the panda and the background of the parcels, and that will secure everything down. Then to glue it at the top, just add a tiny little spot of glue behind where the balloons will be. That's on the first piece of tracing paper. Another spot of glue behind where the balloons are on the top piece of tracing paper. I hope that makes sense. Hopefully the pictures explain it. And with everything glued down, I'm going to add a little shimmer to the balloons using the Spectrum Noir Overlay Sparkle pen. And now I'm going to say thank you very much for your time. Thank you for watching, as always. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. That would be great. I'm going to leave you now with a little music and some close-ups of all of the cards that we've made today. Until we meet again, take care.